Hey y'all, it's Jack. This week I'm making this garden shawl. It has two basic parts or components to it, the basic shawl shape and then the daisies that go on top of it afterwards. So I'm going to start off with the basic shawl shape. I'll show you guys how I made that. And like y'all know, I don't have a measuring tool, like a measuring tape or anything. And you honestly really don't need it for macrame. Whenever I've followed the measurements in other tutorials, sometimes they don't really work. And so I have this rule of thumb that I use where you basically take an end of macrame cord coming off the spool, and then you're gonna measure the length down, in this case down your back, of the longest part you'll want the shawl to be. And then fold the macrame cord back on itself to double the length, and then do that again to double the length again, and then that will be your cord measurement. And I start off with the longest cord in the center, but because it's a shawl, it's going to be kind of like a triangle, or like the sides will be at an angle. And so whenever I added the new colors on each side, I cut about 2 inches off of the cord before it, so that they're gradually getting shorter and shorter, because I'm cutting 2 inches off of each one. So I added the longest in the center, cut 2 inches off, and then I measured that one and cut 2 more inches off, and so on until it gets shorter on the end here. So I started off with this really pretty kind of lacy type of pattern for the trim. And so I actually cut a piece of cord separately to use as the lead string, and I double half hitch knot on top of that, first kind of angling it downwards and then trying to angle it back upwards so that it makes this kind of half moon or a loop like shape. And I did the same like in a mirror image on the other side. And then when they meet in the middle, I make a circle pattern by double half hitch knotting the 2 lead strings onto each other, and then using one lead string to go back in the opposite direction that you just came from. And you double half hitch knot on one of the other color, and then you use that same string to double half hitch knot going back in the other direction, so that it is really a diamond kind of shape, because you're double half hitch knotting in like a triangle and then another triangle, but it ends up looking like this circle. I go pretty fast in this video because there's a lot of components, but with each knot and each pattern, I have a short that I've made separately that goes a lot slower. That's a lot easier to follow. So if it's hard for you to understand what I'm describing at any point, just check the description and I'll put those links in there of those shorts. So then after I do that kind of trim pattern, I'm gonna keep doing it across the whole top part of the shawl. And then I'm gonna move on to make a couple rows of square knots. I make 2 rows of square knots, and then on the 3rd row of square knots, I'm gonna add a couple of berry knots, like you'll see I'm doing here in the yellow string. Because even though it's called a berry knot, in this context, once you add the flowers on top, it, I think, starts to look like little flower buds, like flowers that are about to bloom. And I think that's so cute, so I wanted to add that on. So here I am making the berry knots, and then whenever there's a gap between 2 berry knots, I'm just filling it in with square knots. So macrame is really repetitive, just like knitting and crocheting. Like you'll do the same knot over and over and over again. And I want to show those steps to you guys, but I never know what to talk about. So I've been really curious lately about artistic lineages. Like we think about lineages as in like our family tree, and how like our
different family members have influenced like who we are today, but we hardly ever look at different lineages. Like, I do so much macrame, and there are like so many other mostly women before me, because this is a women dominated field, just like knitting and crocheting and other fiber arts. And so there are so many influential women that have come before me that have paved the way in different ways for macrame to look like what it looks like today. And so I'm going to start a storytime series with this video, going back in time, starting with the most recent previous wave of macrame, which was in the 1960s, 1970s. And I'm going to look at one specific artist, Mary Phillips, who had just such a cool, interesting perspective on art making and textile arts. She had a really interesting life too. So in between instructions, I'm going to talk about that. I think it's just really interesting. So anyway, I just did that row of berry knots and square knots. And so next I'm going to do one more row of berry knots and square knots. And then I'm going to continue the pattern that I just did by doing like another 2 rows of square knots. So while you watch me do that, I can talk about some previous macrame history. It's super interesting. Okay, so like, let me start off by talking about something that's like kind of interesting now. So AI is like so, it's like there's new AI tools being developed every single day, and it's so interesting. And one specific tool that it is such like a topic of conversation is AI artistry, since it's not really like originally or authentically made. AI is essentially taking like other artists' work and then just like factory generating a aesthetic that kind of looks like an alien version of that. And so this artist that I'm going to talk about, Mary Phillips, she was born in the 1920s, in 1923 or something. I'm gonna look and I'm gonna get back to you on that. But she was most influential during the 1960s. But during the 1920s, when she was born, was when we saw the first arts and crafts movement. And so I feel like this is tying into AI. I feel like right now we're experiencing another arts and crafts wave. So we talk about like waves of feminism. We're like in the 4th wave of feminism. I feel like we're in another wave of this arts and crafts movement. So the first wave started right after the Victorian period, where like industrialization and factory produced goods were on the rise. And so there was like a counterculture battling that was striving to make like handmade goods and DIY stuff more valuable than the factory made goods. So that was the first arts and crafts wave, and we saw macrame start to emerge in popularity then. But it really started to peak in the 1960s. I'm going to talk about that next, but then I'm going to go into this instructional first. And then I'm just going to add 3 more rows of square knots just to mirror what I did on top of the berry knots. So I did 2 rows or 3 rows of square knots before the berry knots, and so I'm going to do the same thing afterwards. And then I'm gonna do a pattern of spiral, like a spiral pattern, using a different color thread to have like a little accent color strip. So to do that, I cut a string of cord that is in the color that I want to add on top, and then I just knot directly on top of it the spiral pattern knot, which is the first half of a square knot on repeat over and over again. So it starts to spiral itself like this. And whenever I have like just these little odd
strips of cord that I'm adding on top, like for the berry knots or these little spiral knots. They're like maybe, I don't know, 12 inches, just like an odd amount. Just pull an amount from your spool and cut it. I don't really have an exact measurement, but I just knot until it's too short, like I am here.
Okay, so in the 1920s, we saw the first arts and crafts movement wave. And then in the 1960s, we saw the hippie movement, which coincided with another arts and crafts wave because of the kinds of counterculture beliefs. So they were like more communal, they were more DIY type of lifestyle, and macrame really mirrored that well. So you saw a lot more people doing DIY macrame.
And then I'm gonna add another row. And I'm taking the string that is the same color as the pattern above. So when you make those spiral knots, the strings kind of get twisted, and I just kind of twist them back so that they match and lay down in the same way that the pattern was laying down before. It doesn't really matter, I guess, if you twist them. It might kind of look cool if you switch up the colors like that. It's kind of fun to experiment a little bit like that and just see what happens. But just for this project, since I'm gonna add the same pattern again, I just wanted the colors to be the same. And then I'm doing the same thing, adding a different color on top, just for like, just to switch it up.
Okay, so I checked and I was right. Mary Phillips was born in 1923. So going back to the 1960s, we saw most artists in like the DIY mediums were like home artists that were unnamed, but Mary Phillips was featured in a lot of exhibitions. I think that she really caught people's eye in the more like academic art world, I guess you could say, like where they mostly feature painters and things like that. I think she really caught their attention because she experimented a lot with different materials and knotting different materials in unique and interesting ways. And she also had a really interesting philosophy behind her work. So macrame, like I said before, it's really repetitive, which is why I'm doing the story time. And there's a lot of benefit that you can get from that repetition. One benefit that Mary saw was mindfulness. So doing the same thing over and over again, it starts to become meditative, and you start to feel more of an awareness in your present moment. She also saw art making in general as a sort of spiritual odyssey. So the more you progress in your art piece, the more you are digging deeper and falling deeper into yourself, and can make connections in deeper ways that you couldn't otherwise in other states of mind.
And then I'm gonna do 3 rows of square knots.
And so she had a really interesting philosophy. She was published in different books too. So she was a real pioneer in the wave of macrame. And going back also to her spiritual beliefs on how she saw her creating an art piece as a sort of spiritual odyssey, she also sought to convey that in a way that would resonate within the audience. She was really curious about how macrame and fiber arts can be used to convey these spiritual journeys.
And then I'm going to do another 2 rows of berry knots. And I'm basically repeating the pattern that I made above the spirally knots. And as you keep doing the pattern, you'll notice that it's like gradually forming this like diamond shape. As you can see, like on the edges, I wish I could point on the screen, but as you can see, like on the edges, it gradually is making this diamond shape where the pattern is getting less wide and less wide with each row. So eventually it'll be just one knot wide. And so that's why when we first cut the cord and measured like the first cord that we started with, that's why we cut 2 inches off of each one, because it's going to get shorter and shorter. Like it'll make that diamond shape anyway. So if we measured the side pieces to be the same length as like the center piece, then it would just waste a bunch of cord, because we're not going to be knotting all the way down on the sides the way we are in the center. You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense. That was just like a bunch of extra information that you don't even need. But so this is me finishing this like little row of berry knots, and then I'm going to go into doing another row of another 2 rows of the spiral knots, just like I did before.
So going back to Mary Phillips, her spiritual beliefs were really resonant within the counterculture movement of the time, where macrame was really growing in popularity. One other aspect of art making that that resonated, I think, with the like more communal lifestyles of that like hippie movement was that she really saw how art making could be a universal human experience. How sitting down and making macrame is something that you can connect with other people from other cultures and have a shared experience without any other like previous understanding, like, if that makes sense. Like, there's no language to it. She really saw it as a way of like having a shared human experience.
So now you can see we're like getting to the end. So I'm gonna do another couple rows of square knots, and then I'm gonna repeat the like lacy double half hitch knot pattern we started with to tie it all together, and just because I think it looks really cute at the bottom, because the circle will meet like at the very bottom and it just looks cute. So I added another piece of cord that will be the lead string, and then I'm taking the ends and I'm double half hitch knotting on top of it, just like when we did the first lacy pattern, and I'm angling it downwards in a diagonal shape. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and where they meet in the center, do another circle by double half hitch knotting the 2 lead strings together, and then directing them in the opposite direction and double half hitch knotting one of each of the strings on either side, and then angling it back down, double half hitch knotting the 2 lead strings together again to make this like circle loop. And again, I have this as a short that's like a lot slower. I go so fast in here, so it's hard for me to like really go into depth about what I'm doing, and if I did, the video would just be super long. So you can check out the more detailed shorts that I have, and then that's the end of the basic shawl structure. And when I zoom out, it looks so cute. Especially you can see how the little berry knots are gonna look like budding flowers at the end. I feel like you can really see it here. So then we're gonna move into part 2, which is all the daisies that we have to make that we're gonna add on top. So I don't even know how many daisies I made. It must have been like 28. It was a lot. You just got to be patient and
one perk of doing the same thing over and over and over again is you really learn in depth how to do it, and then the more practice you have, the faster you get at it, so the easier it is to do the next time. If you have like another project you want to add a bunch of daisies on, then it'll be easier for you to do the next time that you do it, even though it's like so hard, or it feels like it's so hard to get through a really long project the first time. You're building a lot of skill that you can use again. So anyway, let me get back into what I'm doing. So I have 3 pieces of cord here. One is super short, that's going to be the center loop of the daisy, and then one is about 12 inches or so. I basically measured it by using a piece of cord and looping it around in the shape of a daisy so that I know like how much string I'll need. But it's about 12 inches or so, and then the one that I'm knotting on top of it is double that length. And so I started by adding the shorter of the 2 pieces of cord onto the little loop one, and then I knot about 5 square knots using the longer one on top of that, and then I am shaping it into like a circle so that it can loop back on itself. Even though it's a chain of square knots, after I do 5, I loop it back on itself, and then I double half hitch knot just whatever end of the square knots onto the center loop, and then I do that 5 times to make 5 petals. So it's basically one long chain of square knots, and you just are gonna double half hitch knot onto this like little center loop of string whenever you have the loop, as long as you want the petals. And then you just cut the ends, and if it looks a little wonky, you can shape it. And it took me, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds to shape it to look like that. So it doesn't necessarily look right right away. And then you can just shape it to look like the shape of a daisy, and then make a bunch of them in a bunch of different colors. So then I have just like, I don't know, 2-inch pieces, 3-inch pieces of cord, and I'm gonna loop it through the daisy, through the center, and then through one of the petals, through the center of one of the petals, so that both of the ends are on one side of the daisy, and that's how I'm gonna tie it onto the shawl. So I have one piece of cord I'm threading onto the daisy, so the loops are on the same side like that, or the ends are on the same side like that, and then I just thread the ends through the loops of the shawl, and on the back side I'll tie it just in a knot, just a normal, like regular knot, and then cut the ends, and I just added all of the daisies on like that, in between the berry knots so that they look even more like little flower buds. That's my favorite detail of this, honestly. And then this is the last part, which isn't even necessary. I just really like doing this for some reason. And so I take the ends and I turn them into tassels. So to do that, you just make a gathering knot. You just get a couple of pieces of the cord and you make a gathering knot on top. And I just used a couple of contrasting colors to make the gathering knot, just because I think it would look interesting, and just add like another detail more than just the cord ends hanging down. For some reason, I don't know, I guess just
from doing macrame, whenever my project just has the ends dangling, it just doesn't look finished to me. But then when I add a gathering knot and turn it into a tassel, boom, it's finished in my brain. So I just do that to the whole bottom. And to conclude the story time, so I focused on Mary Phillips because I really felt like she was a mirror for the overall like culture of the 1960s and during that wave of macrame. So that's the end of the story time. Subscribe if you want to hear the next one. We'll talk about the 1920s a little bit more. It's done. Let me do a little try on. It came out so cute, and because it's macrame and the cord is a lot thicker and denser, it has like a weighted effect, so it's so comforting. It's almost like a weighted shirt or a weighted hoodie, but it sits on top like a blanket, but it looks so cute. So thanks for watching. Bye.